Hi, you all. Welcome to the lecture material on culture, ethnicity, and death. I have struggled with this PowerPoint more than any other in this class over the years, and I've really shifted how I have structured it over time. Because on the one hand, I don't want to oversimplify or stereotype other cultures or use them for like entertainment value. But on the other hand, I don't want to be too vague because it's the specifics that we can remember and that can be so helpful to our learning. I've also been pretty uncomfortable speaking for other cultures, and so you'll notice that on some of these slides, we have students who have cultural speaking, who are the guest lecturer, who have cultural expertise in that area. And so if there is a slide that you have cultural expertise on that I don't have a student guest lecturing for, please reach out to me. I'd love to have you. Certainly we know that experiencing dying and death are universal for humans. Everyone's going to go through it or have loved ones going through that. And we think that grief is also universal. We think that it's probably innate, associated with our attachment systems in our brain, and then the pain associated with having that attachment severed. In every culture, people cry or seem to want to cry after a death. Grief seems to be an instinctive response. Primates and birds, actually display behaviors that seem similar to humans in terms of, losing one of their members in response to that death. And so one of the key points that we're going to be making in this PowerPoint is we want to understand what cultures, each culture is doing to in the dying process after death or for mourning or grieving rituals so that we can be appropriate, right? And so that we don't end up hindering what they believe is important. So for example, if a culture believes that the body shouldn't be moved by anyone but close family members after the death, then we don't want to, as medical professionals or people working in other types of facilities, move the body without permission of the family members. So we'll get into examples like that. On these next couple of slides, I've got cultural questions to consider for professionals who might be working with people around the time of death. And so you might imagine that you're a social worker or a nurse or a police officer or a funeral director, working in places with a variety of cultures. And so, of course, wherever we end up, we're going to want to try to figure out what are the common cultures in our area and making sure we're familiar with those practices. And so we're also, of course, trying not to make assumptions and taking more of a curious stance to really kind of meet families where they're at. And so, for example, we want to be asking, what are the culturally prescribed rituals around dying or care of the body or commemoration? So some cultures believe that somebody shouldn't be left alone when they are dying, or their body shouldn't be left alone prior to cremation or burial. So we want to be, if we're a healthcare professional in a hospital, that's something we would want to be taking into account. What's important. What are the family's beliefs about what happens after death? And so, yes, is there a belief in an afterlife? What would that be called? Or is it reincarnation? And so again, asking and not making assumptions. And then we also have a question around what does the family consider as an appropriate expression of grief? Some cultures are more open in their expression, some are more closed. For example, in Hinduism, some groups believe that excessive grief actually inhibits the spirit from leaving the body. So the grief is going to be not quite as demonstrative. In Egyptian culture, parents who have lost a child have a 7-year grieving period. So cultures can have different expectations, and we want to get familiar with those. Okay, so a few more cultural questions to consider. We want to be thinking about what the gender rules are for this family and for this culture, in terms of the roles, in terms of who's making decisions, in terms of the level of emotional expression that's permitted. So for example, in many cultures, it might be the oldest son who is the spokesperson for the family, not the patient, actually. Or in the Cacciatore reading, we saw that the grandfather was the designated spokesperson. And so, although on the one hand, we may want to empower empower everyone involved to make decisions or to contribute, we also do have to respect if there's a culturally designated spokesperson for the family. We also want to be paying attention to if certain types of death carry a stigma or are considered particularly traumatic. So as we might imagine in many cultures, suicide, it carries a stigma because it might mean that somebody can't go on to the afterlife. For some traditional Chinese, the death of a child can be considered shameful because it defies the natural order, and parents shouldn't overly mourn children because this goes against the hierarchical order of parents and children, meaning that parents by mourning are sort of worshiping children when it should be the other way around, and this could bring misfortune. And then the last one is what communication style does the family use? So Anglo-American U.S. culture values, explicit verbal communication, very clear, concise, eye contact. But other cultures, such as some Asian cultures, place more value on nonverbal cues, more implicit or indirect messages, maybe more euphemisms, and less eye contact. In fact, discussing death openly invites bad events or misfortune. So again, the idea here is we can't be experts on all cultures, but we do want to just have on our radar that there might be some different ways that this culture has values around dying and death. And then if there are predominant cultures in our regions, getting familiar with those. All right, so now that we've introduced this, we're going to get into the lecture material, and how I've structured the rest of the lecture is that we're going to spend some time first on cultural dimensions, and I'll explain what that is, and then we're going to get into some of the major religions in the United States and what their death-related practices are. So let's talk about cultural dimensions. This could emerge from your ethnicity, for example, if your family's from Russia, it might emerge from your religion. Are you Catholic or Muslim? It might emerge just from your family, the traditions and practices that have been handed down across the generations. And of course, you might have family members coming from different ethnicities and different religions that are kind of creating kind of competing or varying practices. Okay, so in my time kind of reading about death across different cultures or teaching about it, I've kind of come to think about some varying cultural dimensions. So this isn't a specific model, it's just my thoughts. And so I'll walk this through, and then I'll give you some more examples on the upcoming slides. Let me give you a heads up that for either in-class discussion or if you're online, an online class participation assignment, you'll be picking 4 of these dimensions, and that can be like the bullet points, not just the overarching category, and placing your family's culture somewhere along that continuum, because again, it could be assertive is on one end and deferential is on the other end, for example, but you could be anywhere in between. It's not either or. And so you could be thinking about, in preparation for that, which one of these resonate for you? How can you kind of categorize your family in terms of these cultural dimensions related to death practices? So the attitudes towards the medical community varies from being more assertive to being more deferential. Deferential means like not kind of, deferring to the people in charge, like let's not bother them, let's, we can do what they say. Whereas assertive would be kind of making sure that you've got your needs met. Obviously, there could be anywhere in between, how people are kind of approaching medical professionals or legal people, lawyers, or the funeral industry, right? There can be ways where they're being more deferential, being more assertive. We always want to be kind of paying attention to that. And especially when people have a culture of more deference to authority, we want to try to empower them to state what they want, right? Some people are automatically going to tell us what they want, and some people are going to need more permission. And so we might be saying things like, it's important that we do this right by you, so please let us know what's important for you and for your family. Or please let me know if I'm ever suggesting something that doesn't fit with your values or culture. In terms of medical community, people can also be more mistrusting of the medical community, and we'll get into some examples of that, or anywhere on the range of that to more trusting. So obviously, when we're working with populations who have maybe been minoritized, discriminated against, we might be, and we're maybe of like, for if you're a white person, right, you might be having to work harder to create a sense of trust because there's maybe an institutional history of not being treated as well. In terms of emotional expression, families can vary in terms of, are they expressing a lot of emotions, whether that's sadness or anger before and after the death, or is it more on the low side? Is it something that you can express, but it's more within the family and less, within with professionals? Is it perceived as a strength, or are people perceiving that as a weakness and you have to be strong and stay stoic? So I'm saying either or, but again, it's all a continuum. In terms of following the death, having stories or eulogies, kind of presentations or people speaking at funeral memorial services, sometimes there's a real emphasis on that, even if it's maybe more informally at a wake, and we're telling kind of funny stories. Sometimes it's important that we have someone who really knows the person giving the eulogy, and doing right by them. So kind of knowing that might matter depending upon our professional roles. And then, yes, what are the gendered roles? Are they more different? For example, this is a role only men can carry the casket, in this culture or in this religion, or are they more similar? What's the view of death? Is it viewed as something that's more natural, maybe more of a part of life, or is it viewed as something that's more to be feared, the enemy? How much fear is there around it and kind of disconnected from life? In terms of rituals before and after death, are there a lot that are kind of a lot of them, and that they're also more maybe expected, like we've got to know we have to do these things to get their soul to the afterlife, for example, or maybe it's more informal, or maybe there's not too many of them. And then in terms of the focus on the afterlife, we'll see some examples where, yes, that's very important and very much of an emphasis, and then others where that's not so important, and anywhere in between. And then thinking about the relationship with the deceased. Is it more of a sense of time to move on, right? Or is it that you can have a continuing bond? And generally, in more individualistic cultures, we've had a history of time to move on. And in more collectivist cultures, we've had a history of a continuing bond and ancestor worship. And I think individualistic cultures have more recently been learning from collectivist cultures, and believing that it's actually okay to continue to have a relationship with them, whether that's you continue to honor them in your home or at special times of the year, or you talk to them, or you believe that they're supporting you. So we are seeing more of that, but again, families and cultures can really vary.
Hi everyone, my name is Maricruz Luna and I took this class spring of 2025, and I'm going to mention a little about my culture and kind of like what we do in my family. So what we do is on October 31st, we light a veladora, which I think to English translates something to like a spiritual candle of some sort, and we put up this altar. So what you see here is something that we've done in my family. So it's just like food and like, well, it's food that the person that has passed away really enjoys. We put their photos up, and we put the marigolds on there. It's kind of like the main things that go on there, and we use a lot of like purples and fuchsias and oranges and yellows and blacks, like kind of those colors that really represent El Dia de los Muertos to us. And we light the candle until the candle just kind of dies. And then that's kind of when we take down the altar, which would be kind of after November 2nd, because that's El Dia de los Muertos. We also hold a really big mass, and the mass is held for kind of like everyone that's passed away. And if there's a specific day that the person has passed away on, so for example, my uncle passed away on November 2nd, so on November 2nd, we do a separate individual mass for him. It does cost a little extra, so if you're more privileged and like you're able to do that, you can. And the mass is just kind of for them, remembering them, like their legacy, what they've done, and how he is living a better life now. And after that, we just kind of clean up everything, all the altars, and we go to their graves, we clean them up, and we continue to leave the flowers there and stuff. And I think that's pretty much it. Well, thank you so much.
Hello, 332 class. My name is Markeisha Olson, and I have the pleasure of informing you a little about the Black community and grief. While grief and how it is handled depends on a person's religious beliefs, which you learn throughout this PowerPoint, I want to tell you a little bit about the death of Emmett Till, and following this, you will watch a short video to give you more information. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy who was visiting his family in Mississippi, and less than 2 weeks later, he was dead. His body was found in the Tallahatchie River, I think that's how you say it, and authorities initially refused to release his remains to his mother, Mamie Till, unless she agreed not to open the casket. While she did agree, upon receiving the body and witnessing the condition of her son, she made a courageous decision to hold an open casket funeral to show the world what had been done to him. This decision became a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement and highlights how death and grief can shift not only a family but also a community. This, in addition to incidents like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, has contributed to lasting sense of mistrust and collective grief throughout the Black community. Now, please watch the short video, which provides more context on Emmett Till's story and the impact of what grief does in the Black experience.
So back to our cultural dimensions, here's another example of some Japanese Buddhist mourning rituals. And I'll let you kind of read through this, but you can see that there's quite a few rituals that happen days, follow it at various days after the death, including a 49th day ceremony that it has a feast. And these are all fairly imperative. And then you can see that there's more periodic rituals in the years following. And there's all those years kind of listed there as a way to kind of honor ancestors. I find these kind of, in our culture where we tend to avoid talking about death and being open about grieving, knowing that you're going to have these rituals every handful of years for a long time, I think would bring me some peace of mind if it was someone that I was close to and had really loved. You can see in terms of cultural dimensions that there is more of this emphasis then on a continuing bond with the person who has died rather than moving on. And in terms of rituals, there's more expected and kind of strict rituals for honoring the loved one. In this example of cultural dimensions, we look to the Navajo. And I encourage you to, it's a great, watch this short video clip on the Navajo view of death and kind of where it comes from historically. But basically, because the Navajo have several hundred years of history of experiencing epidemics of infectious disease that were brought by conquering nations, they experienced, many of them died. It decimated their populations due to influenza, mumps, measles, rheumatic fever, and other diseases. And so this led to a lot of fear around death and fear of the dying person, because if you were taking care of them, you could actually get infected and die yourself. So it led to a culture around fear and kind of distancing or isolating yourself from dying individuals, and also burial practices that involved burning the person's body, sometimes burial too, but burning, and also burning their possessions and clothing, or burying their possessions and clothing as well. Perhaps even not speaking the person's name for fear that it would kind of bring the disease upon you or your household. All right, let's start talking about some of the major religions. And as we go, I'll be tying in these cultural dimensions to how they might apply to the mourning rituals of these religious traditions. Okay, so before we get into specific religions, let's just think about the afterlife, what we know about afterlife beliefs in the United States. And obviously I don't expect you to know all of this for an exam, but I might encourage you to know who's the highest, which are Mormons, the highest emphasis on afterlife, and who's the lowest, which are actually Jewish populations with not as much emphasis on heaven or hell or other forms of afterlife like reincarnation. I just want to acknowledge in our classes, we're going to have a variety of religious backgrounds. And you'll notice this in our in-class discussions or online discussions. And so we'll have people from Christian, whether it's Catholic or Protestant. We'll have people from Jewish backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, and then Buddhist, Hindu, Taoist, Confucianist, or a lot of people now identifying as none. And so as we're having conversations about death, for some people, religion really does come into play, and we're going to want to be making sure that we're not putting our religious beliefs on other people. I know most of the time we believe we're right around our beliefs or kind of lack thereof, but we want to make sure that we are kind of respecting, everybody's beliefs and kind of talking in that way, both in class and online. Okay, so as we go through different religions, I invite you to correct me, give me examples, feel free to email me. Okay, so talking about Roman Catholicism, the version of Christianity, it can be pretty important to have a priest for the dying person before they die. Last rites, the priest performing the last rites can hold more importance than confession, but sometimes depends on the person. People of the Catholic faith might hold a vigil or a wake to provide a chance to share about the person after their death. This could include a reading of the rosary. They might hold a funeral mass, which is called the Requiem Mass, and it's a set service of different rituals and readings. You can also have a mass said at a later time in a deceased person's name. In terms of the afterlife, Catholics are the one group that believes not only in heaven and hell, but purgatory. And purgatory is if your soul needs purification before it can go on to heaven. And so loved ones can say rosaries or prayers, for their people who have died to try to ensure that they're getting to heaven, not staying in purgatory or ending up in hell. Traditional body care is burial. But as reflects the general population, there's increasing use of cremation, but less likely to be spreading the ashes due to the belief in the resurrection of the body. So that's why burial, because then, when Christ returns, bodies can be resurrected from the dead. The idea then with cremation is we've got to keep the remains together so that they can be resurrected at that appropriate time. Okay, so whereas in the Catholic tradition there are a lot of kind of expected rituals and more of a focus on the afterlife, in the Christian Protestant tradition, which can include Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian and Evangelical, lots of congregational, there's lots of denominations there. There we see maybe that the rituals are less formal on average, less of them that have to be done, and the focus on the afterlife can really vary. Traditionally, Protestants have focused a lot on heaven and hell. More recently, perhaps like other religions, there's been less of a focus on heaven and hell, or at least particularly hell. Okay, so whereas Catholics would like to have a priest to hear their confession or perform last rites, difference for Protestants is that they feel like they have a direct line to God. They don't have to go through a priest, so they can make their own confessions and prayers directly. Eulogies are still common, so whereas the funeral mass or requiem mass is kind of more of a set of services, we might in Protestant funeral services hear more people kind of giving eulogies or talks about the person who died. Still, traditional body care has been burial, but again, changing because of the resurrection piece, but again, changing more to cremation.
Hey everybody, my name is Nick Bell. I took this class in the spring of 2025. I really loved it. I want to be a grief counselor. It's been a great class. In this little slide we had on Judaism, I had a few things to add, and Dr. Harvey wonderfully let me do a little voiceover, give you guys a little information from someone who is a member of the Reform branch of Judaism. If you are Jewish or Orthodox Jewish or anything, and you know more about this, or you have different things, like this is just my experience personally, so please take it with a grain of salt. correct me if I'm wrong, let her know if you have other information. But really quickly, I just want to say that death in Jewish culture is very different than in Anglo-Saxon culture. The main difference I've noticed is the prevalence and the openness. I think death is a very continual part of Jewish life, to the point where every Shabbat, which is our version of Sabbath, or it's when we pray, when we go to synagogue, our version of church, there's a mourner's Kaddish, and it's a prayer for the dead that you say every week. And I think that really represents how Judaism really sees death as an integral part of life. So just to give you the stuff you'll need for the exam, a big thing in Judaism when you're dying is to seek forgiveness and say goodbye. A lot of the time, similar to in Christianity, you have a rabbi who's a religious teacher come in to hear your confession. Rituals are huge in Judaism. I remember my rabbi telling me that, when we don't know where to turn, we turn to ritual. And that's really been profound for me. That's something that's really stuck with me. There's a ton of rituals, like so much more than I can even get into. One of the main ones is that you do have someone sit with the deceased person's body 24/7 is the goal, from what I understand. Preparation of the body is also very important in Judaism. There's no flowers in Jewish funerals and celebrations of life. I was interested in this. From what I understand, it's because flowers are a symbol of celebration and life and future, and that's not appropriate for a mourning ceremony. This is another one that's very close to me. I don't know if this applies to every Jewish person, but for me personally, I've always heard that looking in the face of a deceased person is looking in the face of someone who can't look back at you. And so from what I understand, a lot of Jewish people have closed casket funerals. You're not supposed to look at a dead person's face. And again, please correct me or come up to Dr. Harvey if any of this doesn't resonate with you. And this is one that wasn't personal for me, but you should know for this class, is that a lot of Jewish communities wear a black ribbon in this time of mourning. And that really goes into the 7-day Shiva example. Shiva is this mourning period where hopefully the community is taking care of your needs, cooking for you, cleaning for you, and your task in that 7-day Shiva is to prepare the funeral, prepare the body, mourn, and pray. And that is something that kind of emphasizes that profoundness of death in Jewish culture. In that time, you cover mirrors. It's a really interesting. From what I understand, it's vain to look in the mirror while you're grieving. I might also be misrepresenting that, so please don't be afraid to speak up. Another really interesting one to me is that you don't bring flowers, but you bring stones. And from what I understand, this comes from thousands of years ago when graves were a relatively non-technologically advanced feat. You would bring a stone because that would slowly rebuild the grave. As wind and rain comes in, the rocks get moved, and so every time you visit, you bring a new stone to protect that gravesite. And I think it's a really beautiful tradition. And finally, I will talk about the yahrzeit. A yahrzeit is the year anniversary of a death. It's very important to Jews. On yahrzeit days, a lot of Jews have really severe, intense reactions, and sometimes they don't even know why. And that is a really big part of Jewish culture. Is you say this special prayer, you kind of take a day to pray for them, and you burn this yahrzeit candle, which is that 24-hour candle. So another really interesting thing is with the afterlife. From what I've understood from my rabbi, is that in Jewish culture, worrying or ruminating over an afterlife is spending time thinking about something that we don't know if we can control, whereas life is something that we know we can impact and control it. And so it's almost this obligation to be uncertain, which I think is very different than a lot of other traditions, and it's part of what made me really fall in love with my Jewish heritage. And a quick burial is very important in Judaism. Hopefully at the end of that 7-day Shiva is how I understand it. So yeah, that's a little crash course on Judaism and Jewish mourning and ritual. And please, again, correct anything that's wrong. And now you can understand your Jewish friends a little bit more. Thank you so much.
Okay, so when the person is dying, family members or religious figures might read from the Quran. In terms of rituals, there is a cleansing ritual after the person has died that, kind of basically people who are certified or trained generally carry out. We have a gender difference here in terms of male mourners carrying the coffin. The official mourning period being 3 days, but that's different if you are the surviving spouse, then that's 4 months and 10 days. You can't wear shoes in the cemetery, so that's also important to know. Unlike Jews who de-emphasize heaven and hell, Muslims are more likely to emphasize that. In terms of the traditional body care practices, you would be buried in a shroud rather quickly, and you would be facing Mecca. So again, we see in terms of our cultural dimensions, a higher focus on afterlife, more kind of expected or strict rituals, and some different gender roles. Let me know if you've got other things to add.
Hello everyone, my name is Shailaja. I took this class in spring 2025 and I am here to talk about funeral rituals in Hinduism. I am a Hindu and this information is solely based on my experience and understanding. And Hinduism is so unique that these traditions may change within families or different castes. So if you have any other information, please feel free to share. Now, after death, the body is cleaned thoroughly, dressed in new clothes. The nose and ears are closed with cotton buds and the toes are tied together. There are multiple reasons for this. Some say it is to keep the soul from re-entering the body. Some say it is to avoid the air from entering the body and bloating the body. And some say simply the reason is to keep the body in an upright position. Hinduism is ancient, vast, and complex, and it is hard to tell which one is the right reason. The body is then placed in the doorway of the house with the feet facing south, which is the direction for the god of death, Yama. The middle of the corpse's forehead is anointed with holy ash or sandalwood paste as a symbol of sanctity. A lamp with sesame oil and cotton wick is lit next to the body, and the family members drip milk or holy water into the mouth of the dead person to keep their souls hydrated. Now, some traditions encourage covering mirrors to discourage the dead person from seeing themselves, but this is not practiced by all of the Hindus. Some of the Hindus also prefer wearing white, while this is more of a practice in the northern side of India, not as much in the south. The body is then quickly cremated, most often in 24 hours, and then the rituals last for 13 days. Since the eldest son or the grandson lights the pyre, he performs all the rituals and Vedic mantras for the safe journey of the soul towards its ancestral realm. And if he's married, he performs this with his wife. The daughter prepares the food, mostly in the form of rice balls, called pinda for the deceased. During this period, there's no wearing black, no celebrations, no buying new things, and no festivals for the whole year. All this applies to the paternal lineage. Once the woman of the house gets married and leaves the house, she falls under a different family, so it's a choice whether she wants to do this or not. Now, on the 13th day, the relatives and friends are invited for a feast, celebrating the life of the person and concluding the initial mourning rituals. All the 12 days, the rituals are performed for facilitating a smoother journey for the soul through different obstacles that they might face. And this 13th day is considering that they have passed over, and it is a celebration. Now, after this, prayers are performed and food is offered to the soul every month for a whole year, and then annually during the anniversary. Hindus who practice religion aspire to moksha, which is the end of the cycle of reincarnation, so that they don't have to live on earth again. And karma determines whether a person may achieve moksha or not, and this is reshaped in terms of what they do during the life period. So even offering these rituals for the elders are part of their karma. Preference to die at home over hospital or die without suffering is considered as a good death, and most often these rituals are all performed according to their tradition and customs to make sure the departed souls' desires are fulfilled and providing them a calm and comfortable departure in preparation for their next life. Here, there is a lot of focus on strict rituals. Some of them are not as reasonable for me because they are performed in wet clothes in terms of making sure your body is pure, but again, wet clothes, and if it's the time of the year that is cold, you might fall sick. It just makes the grieving process more complex, according to me, if you are sick and grieving. So sometimes I take rituals with a pinch of salt, but again, each to their own. I see value in these rituals of helping the family divert from the grief and get through it, but also some of the rituals are taxing on their body as well. I hope this was a good insight, and I hope you get to read more about it. Thank you.
Okay, so for the Buddhist tradition, I don't test you on it, but I still think it's good to be aware of, right? Just how different cultural practices around death can be, and that it's important that we pay attention to that. So for Buddhist individuals and families, Buddhist monks would help come and chant prayers for the dying individual. Some specific rituals are that you can't move the body until it's cool. Again, important for professionals to know. Families and neighbors would typically gather to feast. Funerals are more simple and lavish, or simple and not lavish, and often do not involve singing. Prayers can be continued to be chanted by monks at regular intervals. White, not black, is considered the color of mourning for mourners. In terms of flowers at the funeral service, the flowers are red if the person was older and white if they were younger and it was an off-time death. And red envelopes, as you're going to listen in this video clip, so fascinating, red envelopes with perhaps a little bit of candy, basically sweetness to offset the bitterness of death, are often given to attendees of the funerals. Afterlife isn't heaven or hell, but it's reincarnation into one of 6 realms. And basically the mourning rituals influence the soul's status. So what the monks are doing, the chanting, are kind of helping get people to a higher level of reincarnation. So again, important to recognize those and support them. The traditional body care is either cremation or burial, and more flexibility. The cremains can be scattered, contained, or buried. Again, I'd encourage you to watch a little bit of this clip from about attending a Buddhist funeral. Okay, so what I'll be asking you to do, either online or face-to-face, is to pick 4 of these continua. And again, you could pick 2 under one of these dimensions if you wanted to. So you could pick 2 under emotional and 2 under medical, or you can, spread them out. But I want you to pick 4 and write the continuum out, or think about the continuum and think about where you would place your family on that continuum. Would it be at one, more towards one side or the other? Would it be in the middle? And then kind of describe why. And here's some questions to consider. In your family or your community, what patterns of mourning have you seen? And I think it's fascinating to hear from students in this class, whether it's face-to-face or online. educates us all, broadens our minds. What rituals have you seen or participated in, and what attitudes or practices seem acceptable or unacceptable in your cultures? So you might pause and reflect what your future hopes are for your morning rituals in life. Are you hoping to kind of keep the religious and cultural practices of your family of origin? Are you hoping to kind of set those aside? Are you hoping to kind of keep some but change some things, or something else completely? Okay, so I placed a link to this chapter on cultural meanings of death and dying on Canvas. And then I also just want to place on your radar this somewhat new book by Lonely Planet on morning rituals around the world. Just nice chapters, beautiful pictures. I don't have that available for you on Canvas, but you could purchase it on Amazon or check it out through Interlibrary Loan. Great job making it to the end, you all. Think about what you want to remember and teach someone else.